I'd like to welcome you again. It's great to see so many people interested in free markets and liberty. It's winning the battle of ideas that's really important. And if you sort of, those that were fortunate to listen to Charles Murray last night, you could see that his idea is that, we're not going to change this through trying to just elect the right people. We're going to change it by changing the culture. This panel is on the K-12 education system. And you can't pay people more than the value of what they produce. If I'm Walmart, I can't pay you $10 an hour if you make $8 an hour worth of stuff. So any of you that run your own business, how many have run their own business? Okay, well, there you go. You know that, right? You don't get to lose money on every unit and make it up in volume, do you? All right. So how do we solve the problem of poverty? Well, there's only one way to solve the problem of poverty, and that's to make people more productive. And what we want to think about, what that major component of making people more productive is what Gary Becker called human capital. It's investing in your education, whether that be a school or whether that be training or whatever it is. But we're focused on that sort of major one that we talk about, which is education. And let me, just to make a little point here, see this thing, I could take a video of you guys and I could email it to somebody in London. And now you're going to tell me I can't teach a fourth grader to read in the city of Detroit? And when was the last time you heard anyone say, gee, I want to move to Detroit because I want to send my kids to Detroit public schools? Or Chicago public schools, or Baltimore public schools, or Philadelphia public schools. In fact, if I told you your children or your grandchildren were going to Trenton public schools next year, you've probably never been to Trenton, you don't know anything about their school system, but you're going to go, boy, I don't know about that. Which tells you that it's not a Detroit school system problem, it's not a Baltimore school system problem, it's a systematic problem. So each of these panelists are going to provide an insight into how this system works and why it doesn't work nearly as well as the system that makes iPhones, which is the market system. Lisa Snell is going to talk about the relationship between K-12 funding, how much the money goes there, and the output. What are the outcomes? Terry Moe is going to talk about the politics of this system, why it's so hard to make changes. And Richard Vedder is going to discuss the effects of government funding on higher education. So I'd like to begin with introducing Lisa. Lisa is the Director of Education and Welfare at the Reason Foundation, a nonprofit think tank advancing free minds and free markets. I love that expression, free minds and free markets. I use it all the time. They should have a bumper sticker. She is frequently, okay, I need to put one on my pickup. I'm missing bow hunting season right now for this, too, if you are those that saw the talk last night. Snell has frequently testified before the California State Legislature and numerous other state legislatures and government agencies. She's authored policy studies on school finance and weighted student funding, universal preschool, school violence, charter schools, and child advocacy centers. She's a frequent contributor to Reason Magazine, School Reform News, and Privatization Watch. Her writings also appeared in the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, San Francisco Chronicle, Orange County Register, LA Times, and numerous other publications. She's also on she's an advisory board member to the National Quality Improvement Center for the Children's Bureau. She's on the Charter School Accreditation Team for the American Academy for Liberal Education and serves as a board member for the California Virtual Academy. I'd like you to welcome Lisa Snell.
Thank you all so much. So we're going to talk about what relationship does the amount of money that we spend on education have to how our students, and I'm going to focus on the United States in particular, perform. So let's just start with the Robert F. Kennedy Community Schools. It's built on the old Ambassador Hotel site in Los Angeles, and it still has the, what would you call it, notoriety of being the most expensive high school in the United States at $578 million. And some of the things that $578 million bought was state-of-the-art cooking centers like the Food Network, theaters, sound booths, a fabulous faculty lounge with chandeliers and velvet cushions that is 3,000 square feet for the faculty lounge. And here's an example of the theater, high school theater. So, you know, people talk a lot about if schools are clean, if we have nice buildings, so this is an extreme example of that. And there are 5 schools, I believe, that share the Robert F. Kennedy Community Schools Center in Los Angeles Unified. So Los Angeles High School of the Arts, in California, we have something called the Academic Performance Index, and it's an aggregation of all test scores for all grades in a school. So that would be science and math and algebra and reading, whatever. It's our state tests, although the governor has just signed a bill in California, actually, that we're not going to use that anymore, and we're taking basically a 2-year hiatus with no data from testing in California to implement the Common Core. So we're going to have some gaps when we try to do this analysis. But as you can see, these schools, from their scores in 2012 to 2013, after spending $578 million, the Los Angeles High School of the Arts lost 27 points. The School for Visual Arts and Humanities lost 5 points. The Ambassador School of Global Education lost 12. One school, which is the only elementary school, gained 18 points. And one thing that's true about student achievement is it's easier to improve performance in elementary school than in middle school and high school. The longer kids stay in school, the more difficult it becomes, and seemingly the worse things get. So let's look at the big picture. And if you don't know Andrew Coulson at the Cato Institute, he wrote the seminal book on free markets and education called Free Markets, A History of Free Markets and Education. And I would encourage you all to check that book out because it really is historically shows how we got where we are. And obviously I'm not going to go into that today, but I would recommend Andrew's book to learn everything about markets and education historically. But we can see that in 1970, the lifetime cost to put a single student through school was $57,000. By 2010, in constant 2013 dollars, that was $164,000 to put one student through a lifetime of school. We can see that total cost has gone way up, and then at the bottom there, you see long-term trends for 17-year-olds in reading, math, and science. And that line looks a little bit flat, right? We haven't made a lot of gains since the 1970s. And that is the big picture. We spend a lot more on education in the United States for K through 12. We get very little to show for it. Similarly, if you look at how much the federal government has spent on education, you can see that from the 1970s, that line goes way up. The federal government spends a lot more money than they used to on education. And similarly, you can see that student outcomes are still flat. And in addition to that, so this is scores on the nation's report card, we like to call it. The National Assessment of Education Progress. It is valid in the sense that it compares to a lot of international tests. It's a way to benchmark all the different state tests in terms of rigor, and scores on that are flat. If you look at other things like graduation rates, SAT scores, many, many different indicators, you find also a similar flat line, despite the fact that we've made a lot of investments in education. If you look at the United States compared to other developed countries in the OECD's rankings, you will see that we spend a lot of money compared to everyone else on kids for their lifetime in school. And one of the interesting things that the OEC did recently is they did a study of scores on the PISA, which is one of the international tests that rank countries on reading and math and other scores. And they found that countries that spend more than US dollars 100,000 per student from the age of 6 to 15, so we fall at the top of that, they have no difference in improvement in their scores on international tests than similar countries that spend half of that. So Estonia, Hungary, Poland. There's no statistically difference scoring for those countries. And New Zealand, which scores very high, actually has a lower than average amount per student that they spend. So this is not to say that one country is better than another. That's a whole different story. We could spend a long time on how we score internationally, and generally it's right in the middle and not very good for the amount of money that we spend. But the point of this is, and this is what all of the different points of evidence show, is that there's no relationship between spending, the amount of money that you spend, and the kinds of student outcomes that you get. And Eric Hanishek is the king of this point, and he's written many, many studies, and he has a book called Schoolhouses, Courthouses, and State Houses, Solving the School Funding Policy. And I would also recommend Eric's book if you wanted to really get into the nitty-gritty of why school finance doesn't work. But I'm just going to summarize his whole book in 30 seconds. In 1966, it started with the Coleman Report, which was one of the largest and most comprehensive, with a huge sample size of studies that looked at the relationship between resources and student outcomes. And basically, that study, which was very controversial at the time and kind of rocked the world, showed that there was no relationship between spending and outcomes and other factors like socioeconomic status, home life, parents, made a much bigger difference than investments in schools. Hanishek, who's summarized many, many studies, says the majority of the studies have found that the differences in either the absolute spending level or spending increases bear little or no consistent relationship to differences in student achievement. And there's been studies that look at a lot of very specific outputs. Right now in the United States, we're at about 15-to-1 teacher-student ratios. And if you look at, like higher education, if you look at staffing at all levels, we have way more staff members than we have students. And teachers and administrators and every level of public school workers has grown, and not at an equal ratio to enrollment increases. So we have way, way more staff. And when we look at low teacher-student ratios, doesn't make a difference. What about small class sizes? If we just have, like in California, we've had a huge mandate for years for class size reduction. RAND and many other reputable outputs have done large-scale studies, and it doesn't make a difference if you have a small class size to student performance. One of the things that happened in California is, because it was a completely inflexible mandate in kindergarten through third grade, you suddenly needed a lot more teachers. And so the quality of the teachers was not taken into account when they were assigned to schools. You had classes taking place in, janitor halls and kids in crowded conditions because you couldn't, if you were at a school and you had one more student over the 17 class size, you'd have to have 2 classes instead of having 1 class with 18 students. Literally, it was a mandate. There was no flexibility for the principal or the school district to arrange their resources in ways that made sense. And so then you had a shortage of both classroom space and highly qualified teachers. And so consequently, it backfired and you had low outcomes. And that was really the story in California. Teachers' salaries have no relationship. So many of these input kind of variables really have no relationship. there's been studies that look at different states that spend different levels. And when the NEA or different groups that are stakeholders do their rankings, one of the things is they always focus on is, California is 49th, they're 50th in spending. And of course, depending on what kinds of funding you take into account and which people's numbers, it's all over the map. In general, we're right in the middle here in California for state spending if you actually look at all the dollars. But that's kind of besides the point. What the NAEP, which is, again, the nation's report card, shows is that there's no relationship in spending from one state to another and high performance. So low spending states might perform well, and high spending states might perform well, and a lot of states perform poorly. So it's all over the map, and the spending is not what's making the difference. And then finally, in Eric's book, court remedies. There's been a huge number of lawsuits in the United States that go to court on behalf of public school students, and they argue that what the state is spending is inadequate, that these kids are disadvantaged, they deserve more resources. And so there's been cases in places like New Jersey and the Abbott school districts, which is one of the most famous ones, where they now spend close to $30,000 per kid, where they've mandated that you have to spend more money. And generally, so in Eric's book, they do a long-term study of 4 of these states that have had these court remedies for the longest time. And guess what? These states that had $27,000 per kid, their outcomes look very similar to what they look like in the 1990s before the court remedies. So these court remedies also have not made a huge amount of difference. So now I want to kind of switch gears, and I want to look at what happens when money follows the child. If kids are actually have purchasing power, are part of the market, what are indicators that would be a better way to go than having a single payer, a single provider, monopoly system that doesn't pay attention to prices and has no incentive to change behavior? We've established, right, that spending and achievement is not related. And I'm actually going to talk briefly about the market, and then I'm going to talk quickly about some original research that we've been doing in a study that we're going to be releasing this month at Reason. So school choice has been winning over the last few years, and it may seem like it's at the margins, but the 2000s have been a huge positive growth for school choice programs. There's 48 private school choice programs in the United States that include both school vouchers and tax credits, where kids can take money to private schools of their parents' choice. Now, there's difference in quality of these programs. Some of them are highly regulated. But the fact is, in general, they've been growing, and there's way more kids where they get to choose their school than there was in the last 30 years. We're at an all-time high. We're at about 260,000 kids, which seems like nothing, that choose schools on a private school voucher program. But that's a huge amount of growth in millions of dollars. And then if we turn to the studies, we see that gold standard studies show that school choice works. So when you hear the Obama administration talking about canceling the DC voucher program, the empirical evidence, although statistically small, shows that those kids do better, and they certainly do no worse, and they do so for a lot less money. So the empirical evidence, when it's random assignment, has only found positive effects. In a very few cases, they've found no effects, but they've never found a negative effect from using a market system. And that's across academic outcomes for the school choice participants, for the public schools that are subject to competition, for the taxpayers, for things like racial segregation, for civic values. There's no negative effect from having market competition and kids use vouchers or tax credits to go to school. In addition to school choice from vouchers and tax credits, which would be farther along the market-driven system, we have charter schools. And this is where we've really seen the most growth in the education market. There's now 2.5 million kids. They haven't released the new figures, but that's what they're predicting that it's at. So 5% of the public school population in America is going to charter schools. Now, charter schools are regulated, but they have a government contract that theoretically says they have to perform fiscally and academically in order to maintain their school. So that's somewhat of an improvement. They are run generally by nonprofit and in a few cases for-profit providers, and they have something to lose. We look at districts that have the highest percentage. So while 2.5 million kids doesn't sound like a lot, when you look at the geographic areas where they're concentrated, so here in California, Los Angeles Unified has lost 200,000 kids to charter schools in one district. Now, when you have 1 million kids, that doesn't seem like a lot, but they've noticed. New Orleans is the district in the United States that now is at 90%. So again, this is a little bit older data because this study only comes out every few months. Almost 90% of kids in New Orleans go to charter schools. There's no central office. It's completely open enrollment. Kids can go to any school in the city, and you have a lot of competing providers. So what's happened in New Orleans? In 2005, 62% of the schools were ranked as failing by the state. In 2012, 87% were ranked as non-failing. Now that covers a lot of gray area, but it's been a huge change. And let's dig a little deeper. There's a lot of positive research out of New Orleans. Things are going really well, from graduation rates to ACT scores to college attendance. But I think this is a compelling point. In 2005, New Orleans was ranked 67th out of 68th in the state. And since then, they've moved up to the middle, to 38th ranking in the state. That's a huge leap for a city that had a hurricane, that had their infrastructure for their schools completely wiped out. And, in half a decade, they've moved from the very bottom to the middle of their state in terms of outcomes. So in this case, markets seem to be working. So now, this gets kind of into the nitty-gritty. Because public schools have noticed all of this competition, some of them have gotten into the act. And school financing in the United States in general, the way states give districts money is the money does follow the child to the district. But after that, everything breaks down and it becomes a complete staffing model. And how much resources one school to another gets is not at all dependent on who enrolls there. So the money does not follow the child in the school district. Everyone has average salaries, so if you have a very popular school in a high-income area, they could have hundreds of thousands of dollars more in salaries because all of their staff, based on seniority rights, are older and have more years of experience and have higher salaries. So you think about, like in LA, say, or in San Diego, because we're here in San Diego, why is it that a school that draws down all kinds of resources to the districts could have so much less money? Because if you have 100% Hispanic kids that are all on the free lunch program that are disadvantaged, you're drawing down all kinds of money from the state and the federal government to your district. But then at your school level, you have high turnover and you have all new teachers that are at the lowest point in the salary schedule. Completely breaks down at the district level. All those kids generate the money, and then the money doesn't go to their school. And that's how schools have been equitable. So some districts in the United States have moved to what's called the weighted student formula, where the money follows the child, and the child can enroll in any school in the district. And even within a public system, it's more competitive than it used to be. And so we just did this study looking at outcomes of these districts that have moved to the school funding portability, where the money follows the child. And these are the districts in our study, which are places like Baltimore and Prince George County and New York and Newark. And then these are all the places in the United States that are moving towards this portable funding system. And it is because of competition from charter schools and other markets that they are trying to adopt more public school choice policies in their districts, and they want more equity if the money follows the child. And we won't debate whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, because I'm out of time and my button's red. So what we did is I'm going to cut to the chase. We measured all of these different outcomes, what your expected proficiency improvement given your demographics? Are you closing achievement gaps? And we ranked all of these districts. Houston gets an A+, Baltimore gets an F, right? So we had about 20 different indicators. And then we looked at the amount of money in the budget that's going to the schools. And you can see in Houston, about 42% of all the money goes to the school level. The principals make decisions. It follows the child. In Baltimore, only 29%. Houston is closing 22 achievement gaps. Baltimore is closing 2. And then my very last slide right here, what we find is that the more money that follows the child and the more that the principal makes decisions and they know that if the child leaves, they'll lose the money, and the more purchasing power that kid has on a number of indicators, the better they're doing. So the green is how we expected them to do giving their budget. The blue is how they're actually doing. And you can see there's variance. Some schools are doing worse than they should given their budget, and some schools are doing better. But the bottom line is when kids have purchasing power and the money follows the child, the outcomes are improving more rapidly than just giving money randomly to schools. And that's what we found, and that's what we think is good, and I'm going to sit down now. Thank you all very much.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Terry Moe is our next speaker, and he's the William Bennett Monroe Professor of Political Science at Stanford University, and he's also a senior fellow at the Hoover Institute. He's written extensively on the politics and reform of American education. His newest book, Special Interest Teacher Unions and America's Public Schools, which I have brought with me to show you, provides the first comprehensive study of this nation's teachers' unions, their exercise of power in the collective bargaining and politics, and the vast consequences these have for children's schools and reform. As a political scientist, Moe's research extends well beyond education. He's written extensively on political institutions, public bureaucracy, and the presidency, and his contributions to these fields are widely cited. In addition to his positions at Stanford and Hoover, Moe has served as a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. Please join me in welcoming Terry Moe.
Thank you, Gary, and it's a pleasure to be here. As you all know, this nation has been attempting to reform its public schools for over a quarter century. And here we are, it's 2013, and our political leaders are still saying, the system is broken. Right? We need to do something about this. Why are they saying that? They're saying it because this long-running era of reform has basically been a failure. So why is that? Well, I think this is really the question of our time in understanding how we can ever improve America's schools. We need to know what the answer is so that we can do something about it. And, these things are complicated. Politics is complicated. History is complicated. And we can make the answer as complicated as we want. But I think the core of an explanation is really simple. And it's rooted in a universal that's true across all institutions. All institutions generate vested interests. And so if you look at, doesn't matter what you look at, healthcare, defense, agriculture, social security, right? They all generate interest. People and groups that have a stake in those systems that benefit from them as they are and will resist and mobilize power to resist if reformers try to change those systems in any fundamental way. And the thing to recognize is just that education is not special. It's the same. It's the same as all these other institutional systems. This is a universal thing. The only difference is that in education, the vested interests happen to be unions, the most powerful vested interests. Well, this is not true in the other areas. So, when I point this out, hey, the teachers' unions are really powerful. They have a vested interest in resisting change. This is just an objective phenomenon. People say, well, you just hate unions. You're just a conservative. Saying, no, this is actually something that happens everywhere in this country across all policy realms, and it happens also in every other country of the world. And we shouldn't be surprised that it happens in education. We need to recognize it and understand it. All right, so that's what my book is about. It's about the teachers' unions, what their interests are. Their interests are in jobs. This is not a horrible thing. It's a normal thing, right? So teachers have a vested interest in their jobs. Reforms are threatening to their jobs as they're rooted in the existing system. And the teachers' unions have taken action very powerfully over the years to protect those job interests of teachers. That's what this is all about. And I think that goes a long way toward explaining a lot of the failure, not all of it, but a lot of it, that we've experienced over the last 30 years. And we need to understand that. All right, so my book is about union power, how they've exercised their power, how successful they've been in resisting reform. And today I'm just going to sort of hit the highlights and talk in generalities. I'm not going to present a lot of facts and figures, but the facts and figures are in this book. For better or for worse, it's 500 pages long. It has 90 pages of footnotes. People are always saying, why didn't you make it shorter? Why didn't you make it like 10 pages? That kind of thing, like a blog or something, right? But anyway, if you're interested, it's there. And today I'm just going to talk in generalities. And I'll answer any questions that you might have. So let me start by just pointing out that if we go back to about 1960, teachers' unions just weren't a factor. And throughout the country, collective bargaining was mainly illegal in government. But all that changed beginning in 1960, basically. And during the 60s and 70s, states around the country, outside the South, began adopting collective bargaining laws for public sector workers, including teachers. And the result was an explosion of unionization and collective bargaining all over the country. And by the early 1980s in education, the result was that the teachers' unions were massively powerful with millions of members, lots of money, and they became the big power in public education. And the irony is that it was precisely at that time that A Nation at Risk came out, warning of a rising tide of mediocrity in America's schools and setting off the modern reform era. But the modern reform era took off at exactly the same time that there was, for the first time ever, this really powerful protector of the existing system. And so throughout this period, there has been a powerful opponent of reform at every step of the way. All right, so how do the unions exercise their power? They exercise it in two basic ways. They exercise it from the bottom up through collective bargaining, and they exercise it from the top down through politics. So let me talk about both. I think when people think about collective bargaining, they think about wages and benefits, and that's really what it's about. But a lot of collective bargaining is about work rules. And you think about it, work rules are easy for districts to give up because they don't cost anything, right? And so the unions have won a lot of advantage in work rules over the years, and work rules are crucial because what they are rules that shape the organization of schooling. They are the organization of schooling. And what are work rules about? Jobs. They're shaped by the job interests of unions. And so what we get are big fat contracts that are filled with rules, and these rules are, from the standpoint of effective organization, perverse. And the reason is they weren't adopted to make the organizations effective. They were adopted to protect jobs. So, for instance, commonly there are seniority rules that allow senior teachers to transfer to the jobs they want in the district. But what that really means is that the district can't put the right teacher in the right school in the right classroom. District leaders lose that power. They can't allocate their most important resource in efficient ways. This is crucially debilitating. Seniority-based layoffs, very common, right? We're in a period of layoffs. But who gets laid off? Well, junior people automatically get laid off. first? Well, some of these junior people may be the very best teachers in their districts. Doesn't matter. They just lay them off. And then senior people are automatically protected. Well, some of those senior people are terrible in the classroom, and everybody knows it, yet they get kept on. What, this is a formula for effective organization? I don't think so. But everybody knows that these are the rules and that they're not adopted to make schools effective. So I could go through a laundry list, as I do in the book, of all these rules, right? You have these contracts that are 100 pages, 150 pages long. They're filled with rules. And the bottom line of it is that America's public schools are literally not designed to be effectively organized. They are organized in response to power, right? So we shouldn't be surprised that they're pathological, right, when it comes to the way they're organized. Nobody designed them to be effective. Right, so you might say, well, why didn't the districts insist on this? Well, almost all districts are run by school boards. School board members are elected. The most powerful force in those elections is the teachers' unions. As a result, in most districts, if you look at the school boards, they consist of people who are allies of the teachers' unions, sympathizers, people who support collective bargaining, and people who are afraid, right? Afraid that they're going to lose their jobs if they do something that the unions don't like. So it's rarely the case that school boards will stand up to the teachers' unions in pushing for more effective organization. Plus, until accountability came in, the districts had no incentive to pursue effective schools anyway, right? It's just a bad scene. So where do you find districts actually standing up to their unions? Only really in districts where mayors have taken control. Well, there aren't very many of those districts. But the cases that you read about in the paper of districts actually taking on their unions, New York City, Washington, D.C., Chicago, those are districts where mayors are in control. They're different from school boards, right? They're willing to do this sometimes. Well, how much progress have they made? Not much, right? Bloomberg, here he's a multi-billionaire. He's a pretty powerful guy, right? He's been trying for 12 years to bring effective organization to the New York City schools. He's barely moved the needle, right? They have more charter schools, fantastic, right? They've been able to eliminate some seniority rules, good, right? They've been able to evaluate teachers in some respects on the basis of performance, good. Well, Bloomberg's out, right? He's going to give way to de Blasio. All right, you know, the last headline I saw was he's considering appointing Randy Weingarten as chancellor of the schools, you know. So, you know, whether or not that happens, he hates charter schools, right? He is an opponent of reform. So the bottom line here is that mayors have been up against real power in trying to change the system, and at best they've achieved marginal improvements. You know, good for them, but this is depressing, right? This is not going to yield a real transformation of the schools at the local level. The reality at the local level is ineffective organization protected by power. All right, so now let's shift it up and talk about politics, because the real reform process really takes place at the state level, sometimes at the national level, through the political process. The unions are unbelievably powerful in politics. They have over 4 million members. They have enormous financial reserves due to dues that come in every month. They are among the top contributors to candidates and parties in most of the states. They have small armies of campaign workers in every political district all over the country. They have lobbying organizations in every state. They are among the most impressive political organizations of any kind in this country. And in education, they just dwarf all the other political organizations. Okay, and they have the advantage of working within a political system that's filled with checks and balances. So, much as we might like Madison, right, and admire the guy, the fact of the matter is that Any kind of reformist legislation is very difficult to get through because it has to make it over all these checks and balances, make it over all these veto points. And if you want to block, you just need to be successful once at one of these veto points. So blocking is much easier than getting anything done. And that's all the unions want to do. They just want to block. And that's what they've been doing for 30 years. All right, so quickly, the two major reform movements of our time are accountability and school choice. You know, we have a big monopolistic system. We spend $600 billion a year on it, and it's never been held accountable for teaching kids anything. It only makes sense to have standards, to test kids, and to have some consequences when kids don't learn what they're supposed to learn. But the unions are opposed to that. They do not want teachers to be evaluated based on their performance. And the last thing they want is for any teachers to lose a job. So the teachers have been opposed to this from the outset. The result is that we have very weak accountability systems. They lost in No Child Left Behind, but No Child Left Behind has, because of the political blowback afterwards, right, because the unions just kept after it, NCLB has been eviscerated over the years. And so as of today, it's still true. Teachers are not held accountable for teaching kids what they're supposed to know. Nobody ever loses a job because of poor performance. And we've made very minimal progress. 99% of teachers get satisfactory evaluations. It's a charade. All right, so what about school choice? Well, with school choice, it makes perfect sense. You have a lot of kids in this country who are stuck in terrible schools. School choice gives them a way to get out. It's fantastic. Plus, it provides the regular public schools with some competition. You know, if they didn't do a good job, they're going to lose kids and lose money. Good. You know, light a fire under them. Well, how do the unions approach this? They don't want kids to leave the regular public schools. That's where their members are, right? If the kids leave those schools, then money and kids leave, but also jobs leave. They don't want that. So they're opposed to school choice, even if it's for the poorest kids in the country. And they've been very successful over the years. So Lisa was talking about the rise of school choice, and you know, I think it's really exciting what's happened over the years. We do have some school choice. But from my standpoint, all it does is demonstrate how powerful the unions are. You know, the first charter school law was passed in Minnesota in 1991, over 20 years ago. And as of today, 5% of the kids are in charter schools. Is this a joke? 5% of the kids. The unions have been very successful at keeping a lid on this thing over the years. Vouchers and scholarships, 260,000 kids out of 50 million. This is nothing. And vouchers have been around longer than charter schools. This is a real indication of what power looks like in suppressing these reforms. All right, so how do things look going forward? Okay, under normal conditions, the answer would be bad, right? And the reason it's bad is just a very practical one. They're powerful, right? This is a problem of power. It's not about children. You know, we like to think, well, you know, everybody wants good schools for kids. Well, even the unions want good schools for kids, but they have interests at stake, and the interests are what they're pursuing. And power is what counts. Okay, so the only way to solve this is to reduce their power, because their interests are not going to change, right? So we need somehow to reduce their power. The catch-22 is they're powerful. And so if you try to take their power away, they will stop you. Now, they didn't stop Scott Walker, but the other 49 governors are looking at Scott Walker and saying, I'm not going there, right? Because of what happened to him, right? So this is not going to be some sort of contagion, what happened in Wisconsin, right? That is not going to happen. The most important thing that's happening in the country on the political side is that there's a ferment within the Democratic Party. There are liberals and moderates now who are standing up and saying, look, this is bad. The unions are standing in the way of reform. They're preventing us from doing what's right for poor kids. We're going to take some actions that the unions don't like. That's what Obama and Duncan are doing. That's why they did Race to the Top. Good for them. You know, as Democrats, that was a very, very unusual and courageous thing to do, and they did it. However, they're a minority within the Democratic Party, and what this really comes down to, the real problem is that the unions are the power center of the Democratic Party. And so what the Democrats have to do is they have to say, yeah, you know, we think the unions are not doing the right thing in preventing reform, but we still support powerful unions. And they always will. Okay, so the Democrats will not address the power issue. This is not a solution. So are there any solutions? And I think the answer, unbelievably, is yes. After all this depression, right? Okay, so here's the optimistic part. What we need, basically, is to be hit by a meteor, right? To be hit, to have something from the outside, If you rely on stuff from the inside, it's not going to happen, right, for power reasons. But if there's an exogenous force from the outside, it can happen. Okay, and the answer ultimately is technology. But before I get there, think about New Orleans. Why is New Orleans doing so great? Because of Katrina, right? What Katrina did was not just destroy the school buildings. What Katrina did was it destroyed the union and it destroyed the school district. And as a result, the politicians in New Orleans, mainly at the state level, were free. The power structure was destroyed. This is the first time it's ever happened in the history of this country. The power structure was destroyed and the politicians were able to act without constraint. And what did they do? Recreate the old system? No way. They did something totally innovative and created the most different education system in the whole country. Why did it happen? Because of an exogenous event. Otherwise, it would never have happened in New Orleans. They'd still be terrible to this day. Okay, so technology. Technology is this massive revolution that is changing the world. It is going to transform education. Online education is going to change everything. It is going to bring about a more personalized approach to learning. It's not that every kid's going to be at home in his bedroom, graduating from high school. I think there are going to be various forms of blended learning taking place. We don't even know exactly how it's going to happen. But what's going to happen throughout is what's happened throughout history across industries, which is technology is going to be substituted for labor. Technology is cheap. Labor is very expensive. There just aren't going to be as many teachers per student in the future. It's going to get more and more that way over time. This is terrible for the unions, right? Their membership is going to go down. Their numbers are going to go down. Also, teachers are no longer going to be concentrated in districts, right? Because technology does away with the need for geographic concentration. It doesn't matter where the students are, where the teachers are. They could be anywhere in the world. This is very bad, from the union standpoint. Also, there are going to be lots and lots of providers out there. And districts are increasingly going to be contracting. Well, the jobs are going to go out. The money's going to go out. This is bad for the unions. And so over time, what's going to happen, I think, unions are resisting this. They know this. They're not stupid, right? So they're resisting this, but this thing is huge. This is too big. And so if you play it out 10, 20, 30 years, the unions are going to go down. As they go down, they're going to be less and less capable of blocking. And all these kinds of reforms that have been unable to pass over the years are going to start going through, and we're increasingly going to get true reform in American education. It's just going to take a while. Okay, thank you.
Well, with that ending, I can't resist recommending Hillsdale College's online courses, which you can find by going straight to the middle of our website. Richard Vedder is our next speaker, and he earned a degree in economics at Northwestern University, his BA there, and his PhD in economics is from the University of Illinois. He studies U.S. economic history, particularly as it relates to public policy. Some of his specific research has involved American immigration, economic issues in American education, and the interrelationship between labor and capital markets. He's an adjunct scholar at the American Enterprise Institute and is the author of numerous books and articles. His books include Going Broke by a Degree, Why Colleges Cost Too Much, and I want to put in a plug for that one. That's a really good one. And his 2006 book, The Walmart Revolution. He serves as a distinguished professor of economics at Ohio University in Athens, Ohio. So please help me in introducing Professor Vedder.
Thanks, Gary. Until the last 3 minutes of Terry's talk, I thought this was roughly the intellectual equivalent of having a hemorrhoid operation from an unlicensed French physician back from a wine-laden lunch. Let me present a counterfactual proposition. Suppose the federal government had never enacted the Higher Education Act in 1965 or began providing financial assistance to college students. In other words, suppose we had no federal guaranteed student loans, no Pell Grants, no federal work-study programs, no higher education tax credits, or other forms of federal financial assistance. What would higher education be like today? Well, no one knows for certain. I expect 6 things would have happened. First, there would have been a somewhat lower proportion of adult Americans with college degrees today. But absolutely, and as a percent of the adult population, we would still be at an all-time high. Second, I suspect tuition fees of universities would be significantly lower. My guess is that the sticker prices at colleges or universities would be conservatively 20% lower than they are now, maybe more. Third, I would predict that the proportion of recent college graduates from the bottom quarter of the income distribution would have been greater than it actually is. Higher education would be less elitist. Fourth, I would predict that the strong disconnect between labor market realities and the outcomes of college graduates would be significantly less. We would not have over 115,000 janitors or 1 million retail sales clerks holding bachelor's degrees or more. We have, incidentally, more janitors with bachelor's degrees than chemists with bachelor's degrees in this country, or architects. My statistic du jour. You will notice there are no PowerPoints here. I use West Virginia PowerPoint. I just throw my hands. Fifth, we would have had much better academic performance than we have today. We would have fewer college dropouts and a larger proportion of students graduating in 4 years. We would probably have less grade inflation, fewer climbing walls and luxury dormitories, but a larger proportion of students acquiring meaningful increments to their knowledge about our civilization and to their critical thinking skills. 6, we would have far fewer collegiate bureaucrats, greater emphasis on teaching, and no million-dollar university presidents. There would be no talk of a higher education bubble or U.S. presidents denouncing high university costs. The American Council on Education and other groups would have fewer lobbyists collecting economic rents from the federal government. In short, higher education would be a lot different. Now let me elaborate for a minute. I think federal provision of grants and subsidized loans has increased the demand for education, higher education. It has probably also increased the supply of services too, but not as much since many higher education institutions do not try to maximize enrollments. Indeed, success in higher education is often equated with refusing to accept customers. That's what Terry's school does, Stanford. Unique among businesses. McDonald's doesn't have an admissions office, but Stanford does. Government programs have succeeded in getting more kids through college, although I suspect the 6-year graduation rate of Pell Grant recipients which is a state secret, probably eluding even the NSA, is somewhere in the order of 1/3. For every Pell recipient who graduates, 2 do not. Since these financial aid programs raise demand, they lead to higher tuition fees. Education Secretary Bill Bennett posited that hypothesis in 1987. I think he was right then and right now. Federal data suggests that around 1970, before Pell Grants even existed, and when federal student loans were very modest in number and size, about 12%, 5, 10, 12% of recent college graduates came from the bottom quarter of the income distribution, compared with 7% today. Despite federal financial assistance programs that have multiplied about tenfold in inflation-adjusted terms, a smaller proportion of college graduates are poor persons, suggesting these programs have abysmally failed at achieving their goal of expanding educational opportunities for the economically less advantaged. Lower income persons are more price sensitive than more affluent ones. So high sticker prices have led to relatively more poorer persons saying no to college or picking less expensive options like community colleges. The FAFSA form required by the federal government has been historically a highly complicated, intrusive way of getting financial information. By the way, the only college in the United States that doesn't allow any of this thing to happen is Hillsdale, I might add. Kids from affluent families complained but completed this form, but many lower income families just gave up rather than answer over 100 questions, many demanding highly personal information that, if asked by any other business, might lead to criminal prosecution of the business. Go into a car dealer and they say, fill out a form, tell us what your net worth is, and then we'll tell you the price of the car. In 1970, less than 1% of taxi drivers had college degrees. By 2010, the proportion exceeded 15%. College graduates think their degrees means a ticket to a moderately affluent middle-class life in managerial, technical, or professional jobs. Yet almost half of the graduates all college graduates are in occupations that the Department of Labor tells us typically requires less than a college education. The modern-day enrollment explosion, fueled by student financial aid programs, has aggravated enormously this problem. The connection between academic performance and federal financial aid is also real, maybe less obvious, but real. The time students spend on academics has declined in tandem with increased federal student aid programs. Grades have risen, but student academic effort has fallen with increased student aid. The civics literacy test of the Intercollegiate Studies Institute or the Decennial Adult Literacy Survey of the U.S. Department of Education show that core knowledge and literacy amongst college students are falling. Arum and Rokska compellingly argued that critical thinking and writing skills are not substantially advanced during the college years. Despite rampant grade inflation, college dropout rates remain stubbornly high. 6-year graduation rate is officially reported nationally to be about 60%. 40% don't graduate. I think one reason for deteriorating academic standards is that there are no performance expectations associated with federal student financial aid. Colleges have no skin in the game, so they promote federal student borrowing for those who they know have a low probability of academic success. All of this contributes to a dumbing down of curriculum and standards. By the way, I'm in my 49th year of teaching, and I taught yesterday by TV. Technology. As Terry's right, by the way. I'm coming to it. We're going to pick up a common theme here, actually. as colleges have raised tuition fees more because of students' federal student aid, this has increased their revenues. Where have these funds gone? Looking at changes in college staffing and spending suggests that a large portion has gone for non-instructional purposes, such as huge growth in the number of administrators. Rising university revenues have probably also stimulated the college edifice complex. Expensive buildings, many for non-academic purposes. The federal student financial aids are helping fund a costly and academically dubious academic arms race. Now, I have emphasized that the current federal financial aid program is dysfunctional, costly, not achieving its egalitarian goals, increasing tuition fees, and so forth. Getting rid of it is highly desirable. Ideally, I think it should be eliminated, not reformed. The dilemma, however, is that an immediate elimination of the program would be disruptive and arguably unfair to individuals using these programs. In short, there are significant transitional issues involved in abandoning the status quo. Moreover, given the huge political constituency, going back to power again, receiving or anticipating federal student financial aid, it is probably politically impossible to eliminate these programs overnight. But I think there may be possibly a politically feasible way to mitigate the negative impacts. Here are 7 ways to dramatically reduce the taxpayer burden and the inefficiencies and pathologies associated with the current system. First, restore the original goal of helping poor persons attend college. Right now, over 17% of students from families with incomes from $60,000 to $80,000 a year get Pell Grants. These are families with above median incomes, and they get Pell Grants. We should greatly tighten eligibility, reduce the number of Pell Grant recipients by maybe 50%. Similarly, PLUS loans to parents of high-income kids should end. Tuition tax credits benefit mostly affluent families whose kids would go to college even without them. Go to a single grant program and a single loan program. Second, impose academic performance standards to continue receiving grants. Reward students who graduate in less than 4 years and eliminate aid for, say, students in their 6th year of full-time attendance. You can go 6, 7 years and get a Pell Grant. Third, have federal government stop making loans, rather merely guaranteeing loans made by private lenders. The feds have to borrow to pay their own bills. So implicitly, they borrow from, say, Chinese bond purchasers in order to make college loans. Not only return lending to private lenders, but strengthen the tie between interest rates charged to students and market rates. Fourth, make participating colleges have skin in the game. If colleges accept students and promise them Pell Grants or guaranteed loans, make them share the burden associated with high levels of loan defaults and low graduation rates. This should reduce the number of students lacking the aptitude, the background, or discipline for college learning. I'm not part of the College for All crowd, you can see. Fifth, limit federal aid to assisting students attain just a basic college education from a relatively low-cost university. Limit assistance to a few $1,000s a year, and do not subsidize a Harvard education more than one at a relatively lower-cost university. Right now, there's a vicious circle. Colleges raise their tuition fees, so the feds make larger loans to students, leading the colleges to raise their tuition fees again. Cap student federal assistance increases to the inflation rate. 6, convert Pell Grants into educational vouchers, going back to Lisa's earlier point. Now Pell money is distributed through school financial aid offices. Colleges offer government money to students as if it were their own money. Why not give the money to the student directly and let them use it wherever they want, empowering them more and making institutions more attentive to student needs? Moreover, such educational vouchers could go only to low-income students if you wanted. Similarly, the vouchers amounts could be tied to good academic progress. Top students could be paid a little extra for superior academic performance. If we made 5 million of these grants at an average amount of $4,000 apiece, the cost would be $20 billion a year, which is 40% less than we spend currently on Pell Grants. And all Americans attending college who were truly poor would be accommodated. Seventh, encourage private investors to begin human capital equity funds, where students sell equity in themselves rather than debt. The investor would pay college costs up front, with a graduate paying the investor a proportion of the income for a specified time periods. Markets would adjust in favor of students with better graduation and vocational prospects. A graduate from MIT majoring in electrical engineering might pay 8% of his income for 15 years, while one majoring in anthropology from Central Michigan University might pay 72% of their income for 50 years. These market signals would help reallocate resources within higher education. Summarizing, I think the federal government should exit providing financial assistance. Americans have suffered from the Byzantine system of federal loan, grant, work-study, and tax plan, credit plans. But if government financing is going to continue, at least rationalize it, downsize it, and redirect it. Now let's talk for the turn. By the way, I am the only one who's going to finish on time. That's the difference between economists, political scientists, and think tank. Let's turn to the future. Massive government interference in education markets have dulled and reduced healthy market signals needed to reallocate education resources. But markets are powerful, and market signals are working, albeit slower than in an unsubsidized, unregulated environment. Enrollments are currently declining at American colleges and universities. Mediocre quality public universities and private liberal arts colleges with little national reputation or few distinctive qualities are particularly vulnerable. Real tuition increases are lessening, and some schools, out of desperation, are actually cutting fees. State government subsidies will rise only modestly as higher education is being crowded out by other entitlement spending, especially for medical care. At the federal level, a high debt-to-output ratio impedes expanded higher education financing. As America embraces the welfare state with Obamacare and other program expansions, the nation's overall rate of economic growth is dropping abruptly and sharply, reducing the capacity of private philanthropy to fund higher education. Revenue growth possibilities in higher education are limited. There's also a fundamental demand-side problem. The gap between student expectations and labor market reality has grown greatly. From 2006 to 2012, the college-high school earnings differential for full-time students actually fell, while college costs rose considerably. This is unsustainable. We're in the era of the college-educated taxi driver, janitor, and bartender. More persons are quite rationally saying no to college. Schumpeterian creative destruction is coming to higher education. Several hundred existing institutions will disappear. Colleges resist change, but nonetheless it will come. Part of it will come by substituting electronic forms of instruction for existing instructional methods that date back to Socrates. Part will come by traditional residential higher education undergoing major changes, perhaps reversing rapid increases in non-instructional staff and reduced teaching loads, supporting increasingly trivial research endeavors, articles in the Journal of Last Resort, and so on. Facts. Since 1985, there have been 35,000 articles written on William Shakespeare. 3 a day. He died in 1615. Tenure will go. Non-degree forms of demonstrating competency to employers might emerge, perhaps by creating a test of critical thinking skills and core knowledge. Call it the college equivalency test, modeled on the GED test for high school diploma equivalency. Who knows? Maybe we'll emulate Oxford and continental European schools with 3-year bachelor's degrees. Well, the specifics that I've given you here may be wrong. Large changes are ahead for American higher education, and I conclude with 25 seconds left on my time.
What a terrific panel that was. Maybe you can give everybody. Okay, with that, we have a few minutes for questions, and if you raise your hand, I will call on you, but please wait, because this is being recorded, until you get a microphone. And so the first question will be right there. And the panelists will remain seated.
My question is for Mr. Moe. While no fan of teacher unions, I would argue that the real problem in American K-12 education is an uncompetitive education system lacking in free market discipline. Unions compete at UPS against ununionized FedEx in a relatively free market system successfully, but in education, because the lack of market discipline, they control the system. Your comments?
Well, I think unions thrive in a non-competitive environment. Right, that's exactly what they want. I think that it is true that competition imposes discipline on them. But you take a look at the private sector, only 7% of workers are unionized now. Why is that? Right, I think a lot of that is due to the fact that with globalization and the increasingly competitive nature of the U.S. economy, unions have increasingly been driven out, right? Because I think what unions do is they impose higher costs on firms, and they impose more rigid organizational structures that make effective and efficient performance difficult. And so while I think it is possible for some unions in some companies to function well and not drive their companies out of business and put them at a competitive disadvantage, I think that's typically not what happens, right? What happens is that they do put their companies at a disadvantage, right? And so that's why I think in the public sector as well as in the private sector, unions fight against competition. What unions want is a regulated, safe, monopolistic environment. That's where they thrive.
Yes, right there.
Thank you all for an excellent presentation. This is for the whole panel. I would like one of you or all of you to comment on what you do with the United States Department of Education. Thank you.
Start on this side. Lisa.
Okay. I mean, the U.S. Department of Education, I guess, is just a reflection of the entire problem and the political aspect of education. And so the problem is that the vested interests rely on the money now from the U.S. Department of Education. So on the one hand, you may be able to reach people within the federal government in terms of congressional leaders or whatever that want to reduce the Department of Education, but the stakeholders that lobby for the money and the increasing amounts of money, I mean, it's the same problem that we have with getting rid of Pell Grants or getting rid of unions. The political interests are all supporting keeping the U.S. Department of Education intact. And as much as they might complain about them encroaching on their rights and their roles, even with, states that have made a stand against the federal government and said, no, we're not taking the money, when you check back a few months later, in fact, they have taken the money. So there's not a lot of examples of, even with federalism, of states taking an actual stand in the end where they say we won't take the money and we won't be regulated. But I think federalism is ultimately the only way that will happen. If you actually have someone in Texas opting out completely of the system and not taking federal dollars, in the end that could reduce the Department of Education. But I'm not optimistic about that happening anytime soon.
Yeah, let me just add something to that. I don't know if this will be very popular in this group, but I'm going to put it out there. Look, I face this a lot at Hoover. I think there's a lot of wistful thinking about bringing democracy back to the people and local governance and getting the national government out of this and governance by the states and everything. And have to remember that the whole reason this country started reforming the schools back in the 1980s is that the states did a terrible job of running their school systems. How about the local systems? They're terrible. Not all of them, but a lot of them. Palo Alto has a very nice school system, right? Detroit doesn't. Okay, so it's not like we can return governance to the local level and decentralize and everything's going to be great. It won't be. And a big push for federal involvement of some kind came about because of failures that are very real at the local level, where actually the vested interests are much more powerful. So I'm actually not a big fan for the national government just getting out of this. Also, in terms of fiscal equivalence, it turns out that education is a national problem, and it has huge implications for our whole economy, right? For our well-being as a society. This is not an issue that the national government should just punt on, right? It needs to play some kind of a role. Now, I think the solution in the final analysis, ideally, would be a full-blown choice system, right? Where we can have autonomous schools making their own decisions about hiring and firing and allocating budgets and all the rest without constraints by unions and so on. But they would have to make it within some sort of overarching framework, right, that guarantees equal access and things like that. And so the question is, how do we strike that balance? But these knee-jerk solutions of getting the federal government out, I think are just wrong.
Education is a somewhat different situation because historically we've had state-run universities and colleges with the federal government playing an extremely small role. The federal government has tried to play a little bit of a bully pulpit role, and I guess I'm echoing Terry in one respect here, that in some ways has been a little bit positive in the last few years. There was a commission which I happened to serve on called the Spellings Commission 6 or 7 years ago. At least it made some modestly positive recommendations that, if adopted, would increase accountability, more information systems, this sort of thing, which are things we need. Had done some good things. So there's been some good things happen. On the whole, however, the whole system has been worsened, I think, because of federal involvement, partly because of the financial things that I was talking about here. And I think the strength in higher education of the American system relative to European system is precisely the kind of thing that was talked about here. We do have more choice in higher ed than we do in public education. We have several thousand universities. This is the one area where we have some choice. It's also one area where the customer has a little skin in the game. They pay some money, which I think has been good. They actually have, some financial responsibilities. So I think higher ed is somewhat different in that way, and I would hate to see the federal government try to homogenize it, which I fear is happening to some extent. It's a complicated thing, and I can't take longer than that. I mean, we should take the accreditors out and shoot them, for example. But we don't have time to talk about that.
All right. Right here in the front. Wait for the mic, please.
One thing I haven't heard here today is how does a disciplined human work ethic relate to this educational problem?
Somebody say something.
I'll say.
This is the basis of our culture.
Let me, in picking up on the gentleman's question, if I may, in the year 2000, 64 out of every 100 Americans over the age of 16 worked. Now, less than 58 do. We would have 12, 14 million more people in the labor force if we worked at the same level we did just 15 years ago. And a lot of it, I believe, is related to a variety of federal interventions, and some of which are in education and some of which are in other areas, such as welfare policies and so forth. Charles Murray has spoken eloquently on this in the past. So we do have a problem. And I'm not sure that the level of literacy among the general public has been enhanced through increasing educational attainment over time in dealing with this. I do think we have some problems.
Is discipline in terms of student behavior to a certain extent?
The work ethic.
So the work ethic.
That drove this country. It made this country.
So, I mean, I think that's one of the things with the traditional education system being so restrictive and the same, especially for secondary school, for middle school and high school, is that it has reduced, I think, the number of kids that are in the labor force, because in some ways the college for all mentality, which, you know, there's some things about that is good in the sense that you want kids learning at a level where they could go to college. So you don't necessarily want them to go to college, but you do want them to have learning expectations that if they wanted to go to college, they would know enough to go, considering that we've spent $160,000 on each of them. They should be able to go to Cal State Fullerton if they chose. But because we have been so focused on that, I think, you know, like my son is in an industrial arts program where they, you know, build cars and solar boats, and he's been doing welding and metal shop and all of these things, and he loves it. And in our district, we have 60,000 kids, and there's enough slots for maybe 300 kids to do that. You know, like if kids were interested in that, there's just very few opportunities, and we've moved away from expanding options in some ways. And that's the good thing about the school choice movement, is that there are niche schools that have tried to go back to choices that would lead to more work for kids. But, you know, we've focused away from work and toward seat-based time for all kids. And I think that that has been because of the work rules that have reduced choice and innovation.
Okay, I'd like to take one for actually standing in the very back there, which make Jenna run around.
So this is for anyone in the panel. If my supposition holds water, it probably affects all of you, but Lisa, it was from your slide. The first graphic that you put up showed 1970 as a comparison point. And I think you could make an argument that if 1970 education was good, those people that were educated in that system implemented everything that we're finding flaws with now.
Would you make that point?
So you may be comparing something that's bad against something that maybe was bad.
So, I mean, 1970 largely is a data point because both it's when many things changed in terms of the way unions and collective bargaining happen, but also it's just an artifact, right, of the data collection systems that we have, in that we became more focused on testing and national data at that point. But, you know, I would argue that the measurement at that time was not good in terms of graduation rates and student performance. And when you look at outliers like the state of Massachusetts, which have made gains for 17-year-olds, or other countries, when you benchmark the national test against international tests, it's clear that the whole world has not plateaued everywhere, and that in 1970 we were at the peak of educational attainment, and we can only go down from there. That is clearly not what the case is. So I do think that we've increased inflationary spending on both higher and public K-12 education. And the fact that across multiple variables, we've really seen no change or improvement. And we have other places or outliers that have seen change and improvement, that it just goes to, you know, and the other question is, if nothing has changed, why don't we still spend $50,000? I mean, if everything's exactly the same and the outcomes are the same, in inflation-adjusted dollars, why would our costs go up so much? We should just do everything exactly the same because it was perfect, and we would only spend $50,000 and we'd all be good.
I'll just add a few points. I think performance, we don't have really good measures from the early days, but I think performance was better back then than it is now. Major things, though, have also changed. One of the things that's changed is unions, as I've talked about, and I think unions have had a huge impact on the nature of the school system, the way it's organized. I think there are just many more constraints and restrictions imposed on districts. They already had it bad. I mean, their incentives were all wrong, and they were monopolistic, and they already had all sorts of reasons for performing badly, and then they got unionized. It made things much worse. But another thing that happened, and this is obvious, and you all probably know this, but women used to have no options in this country, and they became teachers or nurses. And so the very best women in this country, the best brains who happened to be women, became teachers. And so we had this spectacular workforce back then. And the women's revolution freed women to become lawyers and doctors and professors and all the rest, and they did. Right? So now half the medical school classes are women. Half the law school classes are women. This is a true revolution, but I think it's really had an impact on the quality of the teaching force. Okay, so that's a major thing. Another major thing is that the demographics of the school population have changed dramatically. And so it's really important in assessing performance changes over time to separate out these groups and take a look at performance changes across groups. It's a bad situation, even if you look at just white students. But it's not as bad as when you just pool all these students together, because you would expect performance to take a hit just because of the demographic changes.
Well, the red button has come on, so we have time for one more question, and I'd like it, let's say in the back there, right? Yes, Jenna, yes. Yes, you go, yes. Yep.
Hi. No one's really touched on parental involvement. My daughters went to an elementary school here in San Diego with about 350 children. And I was on the governance committee, which took money from the state and decided how to allocate it. We had less than 50 children in this school that scored below the California guidelines. So we took that money, those thousands of dollars, and put them into those kids, and over 3 years, it didn't change at all. And my feeling was, and as was some of the other parents, is that that money that was funneled into those 50 kids and taken away from the other 300 kids went to children that didn't have parents that were really involved. There was a language barrier in a lot of the homes, and there just wasn't the, appreciation or responsibility. So in everything that we've been talking about, I feel like parents have kind of shifted the responsibility onto the teachers and onto the schools, and when are the parents going to start taking the responsibility back also?
So with you're right, obviously, like when the Coleman report in 1966, parents and home environment is a difficult challenge and always will be. So then it comes, what are the best kinds of institutional structures that will work to mitigate things that happen to kids at home? So clearly, the more centralized, monopolistic, union-controlled structures they alienate parents even more. So the kind of school that you're describing, even though your investment in the end didn't pay off, the fact even that you could analyze as a parent how those resources were being spent and how those decisions were being made is still an improvement over, because you at least knew, right, that your investment wasn't paying off, and then you can try to make other decisions moving forward, which in most schools in America, There's nobody looking at, did we make this extra investment in these 50 kids, and did what we were doing help? No one's asking that question at all. So I think the autonomous schools that Terry talks about, without where they have a performance framework, where there's expectations, where the people truly closest to the kids, the parents, parent committees, the principals, the teachers, that they're not always going to have the right incentives, but they have better incentives than institutions that are really far removed from making decisions about what happens in the school. So, and our large study, I mean, it really showed that the districts that removed work rules, that had collective bargaining relief, that gave principals a lot of the money, that used school site councils, that in general, though, on a variety of indicators, those districts are making progress in comparison to other districts. So I think, a structure that even within a fake market in the public system, not the true market that we would want, is still better than the most centralized system that we have most places.
All right, I'll say something here at the end. Look, as a political scientist, one of the things that stands out in our field is that long ago, in the 40s and 50s, political scientists used to frequently say things like, if voters could just be more involved, if they would just, vote for really qualified candidates and, forget about party and forget about ideology, and we should need really high turnout, all this stuff, right? Well, okay. The fact is, as Robert Dahl, one of the most famous of all political scientists, said, politics, for most people, is just a sideshow in the great circus of life, right? And what he meant by that is, they don't want to do those things, right? They don't think about politics all the time. They don't really want to vote. They don't, there are some people who do, but a lot of people don't. And if your whole approach to reform and to politics is to think that you can get masses of ordinary people really involved in politics, you're going to be disappointed all the time, almost, right? So what you have to do is recognize that this is sort of a given, except in special circumstances, that most people, most of the time, just don't want to do this. And this is especially true when you have very poor and disadvantaged populations. They have very difficult lives. They're working all the time. They're juggling all sorts of things. And they are not going to participate most of the time very actively in schools. So it would be much better if they did. And we need to try things to get them involved. But to think that this is the solution is wrong, because it's going to turn into a disappointment. And so the second best solution, I think, is choice and autonomy at the school level, because that gives parents a buy-in, right? There's a personal connection between the people at the schools and those parents, and it maximizes the opportunities for those parents to participate, to feel comfortable participating, and a larger percentage of those parents will participate. But there's always going to be a big gap between the ideal and reality.
Would you get some West Virginia wisdom for us here?
Well, very quickly, Anita is having a fit over here. She's wanting to get us off the stage. My last words would be, we are often said to have the best higher education system in the world. I don't know if we do, but we thought to be pretty good in that area. We're often considered to have a mediocre K through 12 system. What is the biggest distinguishing characteristics between the two? The two is higher education has vastly more choice than K through 12, and higher ed, the customer has skin in the game. Not true in K through 12. They have skin in the game in that they love their children, but they don't have skin in the game in the sense that they have a financial involvement, which is often very powerful incentive to inform human behavior.
All right, this hour and a half flew by, so thank you to our panelists.